Horror can actually be a really good antidote and even problem-solving mechanism for responsibility. I've said in a previous video game critique about the Kale Demos boss from Legend of Zelda Wind Waker that when we think of horror, we don't typically think of this, but this is how I saw it. We think of things that we have to do, we cannot do at all, and so forth. When I said that in that video several years ago, I actually didn't mean that to the degree that I could. It was actually my perception of horror and the things that related to it. The idea of life being unfair, whether that's real or not, and even for life to be unfair as a existing fact, or so to speak. I'll keep putting that out there. Uh, I guess as I said it, but just the idea of unfairness being related to horror, could being not related to horror, or being something of an aspect to it, but not necessarily being about it, and how I put that out there. It was a really interesting thing. I always wanted to make a video about expanding on what I thought about horror in relation to things like video game bosses, but you know, uh, in that wake. But if I have this in the thumbnail, what you'll see is a monster from the Deep Sleep series from Scriptwalder. You know, on the other side, you'll have Benson from Regular Show. And the reason I have it like that, if the thumbnail is that the monster represents horror, and also at that through simplicity, Benson is the representation of responsibility that I have in mind. In question, it's just that's how I've seen it. It's just how horror can teach or even resemble responsibility in a better light. Is that when we also think about horror, we think too about things of the. This is actually in the Proverbs in the Holy Bible, but like the things that you have control over don't, and the difference between the two, that will ensue some sort of respectfulness and humility. And I don't think of humility as being a virtue in itself, because sometimes humility can be back to a double-edged sword. I dare say that because humility has been thrown around a lot, as many other things as we people explain. Many other things, clear and concise, my own traumas, as I've said in other videos. Well, let's not make this so much about me, especially if I want to be responsible for that. Let's make this about what I'm mentioning so far, is that some of these things can be thrown around a lot. But what I do notice is that it does make sense to be able to notice the things that you have control over. In a sense, it's life can be more beautiful, if not more profound, if we do think about the things that we actually have control over, in spite of the things we don't have at all. Whether that is seen as unfair or not. Because when you actually have a horrific imbalance between the things, that can make the tightness of that control can still be more and more meaningful. It doesn't mean that you have to be irresponsible with the things that you do have control over, but when you happen to have the control, whether it be it in a responsible light or not, you can find a way to control those things and still notice that even things you have no control over can still be just as beautiful. But the difference between the two is that you do have control over things that you have to be responsible for, and the things that you have no control over could just be as cliche-ishly, stereotypically be seen as horror. But what business do they have in our world when we know that the things we have control over have their own inconsistencies? Much like the things that we have no control over have their own passive effects. So it's a matter of understanding how the things that you do know how to be catering to, whether you have been able to notice right away how to deal with them. As I've noticed I've struggled with that myself before. I always complained about not knowing that existed before people threw things on me, whether it was in a good faith or if it was just misunderstood. And that you still have to make sure that even if it's not your fault, it is your problem. The horror behind anything that you're irresponsible for, or the things that are beautiful for being truly done in a reckless way, don't have to be the end of all things.